Hello everybody and welcome to this afternoon's session. Sorry we're a little bit late in starting, we had a few tech issues. My name's Lucy McAnespie and I'm Head of Adult Speech and Language Therapy in NHS Lothian. And it's my pleasure to introduce these three research projects. And I'm supposed to share the housekeeping, but we need to go a bit fast. So just to remind people that if you would like to ask any questions, could you put the questions in the question tab? Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to answer questions in the session, but people will be able to go back in and have a look and answer your questions afterwards. All sessions are recorded. And if you'd like to interact during the session, please use the chat. And there will be the code that pops up at the end so that you can use. So just to get straight into it, it's my pleasure to introduce Alison, then Claire and Zoe, and then Jill to share their research. So I'll pass over to Alison now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Alison Druitt. I'm a researcher at Loughborough University. I'm also a speech and language therapist. And I want to talk to you today about a massive piece of work that was funded to the tune of over £3 million by the NIHR, which was using AI to understand the patterns of ill health among people with learning disabilities. I'm going to talk to you about one of those work packages, which is about visualizing health information. So it's about trying to translate the data science into kind of accessible and meaningful information for people with learning disabilities. Here's a picture of some of our participants, and I'm truly very proud to be a part of this Decode research because it very meaningfully involved people throughout. And that was through our patient partnerships, through our PPI, and through the workshops and focus groups that we set up throughout the entire project. Next slide, please. Next slide. So Decode Research, it's got an awful acronym. We don't look at that acronym. Essentially, it's using AI to understand the health conditions of people with learning disabilities. Next slide. As I said, I'm talking about one part of that research project, which was work package 3. Work packages 1 looked at the data, the data from CPRD England and SAIL, and very clever mathematicians and statisticians worked out very clever algorithms to understand the trajectories of health conditions and the clusters. And our job, my job, was to lead on the piece of work, which was to ensure that that data science was made relevant for people with learning disabilities and for family carers. We also did some work with clinicians, developing a dashboard based on the data. Next one, please. So knowledge translation is really important. It's more about, it's about understanding not only do people have kind of reading and writing difficulties in this group, but also their understanding of health organisations is more limited. They have difficulties with numerical understanding, visual literacy and research literacy. And so this is about trying to kind of bridge that gap. Next one, please. Now, we all know that traditional research outputs require very high levels of literacy. And in fact, many of the visualizations that were developed by the group were beyond me. And it was our task to try and make that into something that, ordinary people could understand at least, and learning disabilities too. Next slide. So our work focused on developing an animation, which we called Maria's Story. That's obviously a sort of a dynamic output, and a series of infographics. So I'm going to talk to you today about the animation, which we called Maria's Story, and that focused on trying to bring to life one of these trajectories. So the data scientists had discovered kind of what were the most common sort of health patterns. And one of those trajectories was looking at epilepsy leading into diabetes. And so we created a story around that, and a story around, well, if that's your health trajectory, what do you do? Next one, please. This just gives you an idea of the kinds of infographics that we've designed. Again, co-created with people with learning disabilities. Very, very surprising that there doesn't even exist a kind of a single icon to describe diabetes, or a single icon to describe mental illness. And we think that kind of that visual vocabulary is a really important thing to develop, in terms of trying to increase people's understandability around these health conditions. I'm whizzing through this very quickly, and I'm aware of that. So if anybody wants to look further at these things, we've got a really excellent web site, and you can actually download these things for free. We want these things to be used and to be out there in the real world. So please do have a look at them and do use them if you think that they will be useful for you in terms of any of the work, the clinical conversations that you're having with either carers or people with learning disabilities. Next slide, please. So we want to try and kind of elevate this idea of storytelling. And there's a lot in the literature now around storytelling and the importance of storytelling. But we're trying to kind of suggest that storytelling is a really good way to get across some of these really complex ideas around risk, probability, sequencing, and so on. And the reason is that stories, we know, are really good to connect with people's emotions, and that triggers memories, it helps with retention, it helps motivate people and change behaviour, it raises awareness, and it certainly helps understanding. Next one, please. So Maria's story, there's the YouTube link, and I would urge anybody who's interested to please have a look and give us your feedback, because this is an ongoing project. We are still learning, we are identifying gaps in knowledge, and we think there's a lot of work to be done here. So anybody interested in this research, please do get in touch with me. Next one, please. So I'm very, very fortunate. I work in the design school of design and creative arts at Loughborough University, and I'm surrounded by really creative, amazing, brilliant people who were able to, the students were able to get involved and help us with prototyping and helping us with the development of the characters and the story. And you can see there the top line and the third line with the white background are earlier prototypes, and the second row and fourth row show later prototypes. Next one, please. So what I want to talk to you about is not about the methodology, although I have written that up and submitted that for hopefully for review and for publication. I want to focus on the learning. I want to focus on the learning that we had from our people with lived experience, who taught us so much, and that learning has been kind of put together in terms of this framework, this 7 design principles framework. Next slide, please. The development of the 7 principles was very much an iterative process. So it developed out of producing these outputs and shaped the outputs. So there's very much a kind of an iteration there. Next one, please. So the 7 design rules is the 7 design principles, but it's an easy read version because we took it back to our PPI. We took it back to our people with learning disabilities who gave it much more accessible language. So if you prefer, you can look at that. I am going to go through each of the design principles. So I've just noticed that somebody's written that in the chat. Next one. So the 7 design principles are that obviously people with a learning disability are a very heterogeneous group. We need to think about cognitive overload. We need to think about attention differences. We need to think about the fact that people with a learning disability are more likely to have a literal understanding. We need to think about meaningfulness. And we need to think about their emotional state, and we need to think about numeracy. Next one, please. Now, I feel like I'm talking to a very skilled group here. I mean, ordinarily I'm talking to designers and a very different kind of body of people who don't perhaps understand people with learning disabilities as well as I know a lot of this audience will. So when I talk about people being heterogeneous, obviously one size doesn't fit all, quite clearly, and that has real repercussions for how we co-create and how we use health information in practice. But the key things that I want to draw attention to are probably around kind of people are more likely to have visual impairments. And we know that people with a learning disability will have a higher kind of level of people who are also autistic or maybe neurodivergent, and that has implications for visual information. Next one, please. So in our Maria's story, we were really fortunate to work with a group of people, including the signer who did Makaton signing for us. And again, we learned a lot from that about how you script and how you should really involve people right from the start if you're going to use Makaton in any information. Next one, please. I'm sorry, I know I'm whizzing through this. So cognitive overload, it's about all of those different things. It's about language, it's about symbolic representation, it's about the sound, the visuals, and kind of how you expect people to shift attention. Next one, please. So in our workshops, in our focus groups, we showed pictures, we showed photographs. We were struggling with this idea of whether to use photographs or drawings, and we know from the symbolic hierarchy that photographs are traditionally thought of as being easy to understand. In fact, what we found is that unless the doctor was actually their doctor, they didn't really this was confusing to use a photograph of an actual person as a doctor if it wasn't their doctor. Symbols can be easier to understand if there's something that people have grown up with, if they have a lived experience of using those symbols. So their opportunities are key here. In fact, that symbol was really catastrophic. People thought that was a tie. They didn't recognize that as a stethoscope at all. So what we find with storytelling, so the image underneath, is that because it's providing a context, it helps with understanding. So the context there is quite clearly a GP surgery because there's a doctor with a computer, and that's how people understand GP appointments. Next one, please. So in terms of attention, again, lots of different aspects to attention. So filtering information and so on. I'm going to move quickly to an example because I'm going to focus on the examples rather than the challenges. So if we could have the next slide, please. So in our workshop, we showed this very commonly used picture. People might recognize it as Change Picture Bank, and it's to denote autism. In fact, when we showed that picture to people, they were very nobody understood this as a picture about autism. They understood this as a picture about somebody with a hearing impairment because they were holding their ears. And the reason for that is there's some very important reflections to make whenever you're using pictures about what's being foregrounded and what's being backgrounded, because people's attention will be different. They will maybe focus on the kind of the detail of what's in the front rather than what's at the back. Next one, please. So we had Maria needed to be very easy to recognise. Obviously, we're showing long-term multiple health conditions. We're showing the trajectory over life course. And so we needed Maria to be recognisable as a child and as an adult. So we used this idea of a headband, a kind of an iconic way of representing Maria. But we tried different ideas. We had her wearing the same T-shirt. We had her with the same hairstyle and so on, and that's what worked best. Next one. So the fourth one is around literal understanding. Now, I know in speech and language therapy we use this idea a lot in relation to kind of written and spoken communication, but here it's thinking about it in terms of pictures. And so this picture here, most of you might look at that picture, and I wonder how many of you instantly considered this to be about thinking. Next slide. For our people with learning disabilities, it was a cloud and a light bulb, and had no reference to thinking at all. So it's thinking about kind of how people interpret pictures, and this idea of the light bulb moment and these sorts of metaphors and ideas in our everyday currency may not be the same. Next one. Being meaningful was critical. So in earlier pictures, we had Maria at the doctor's surgery and she was on her own. And very quickly, our people with lived experience said, but we don't go to GP appointments on our own. We go with our carer. So the whole story shifted about being supported by a carer. Being meaningful is really important. Even Paula there is denoted with a lanyard. Originally, we had Paula, the support worker, wearing a kind of a uniform. And again, people said, no, they don't wear, my carer doesn't wear a uniform, but they might wear a lanyard. So next one, please.
Alison, sorry to interrupt, but could you stop in about a minute? Thanks.
In a minute. Okay, fair enough. Flick through, because that's just an example of the same thing. So emotions, we need to think about emotions. And obviously there's been lots of really excellent work recently around kind of understanding the kind of double empathy and so on. So that's important. Next one. So in our work, it was really important to show happy faces, positive messaging. People don't want negative stories. They won't read health information if it's negative. Next one. Yeah, and the next one. And the next one. So again, here, you know, in terms of understanding, people didn't understand this as putting on weight. They didn't understand this as being about diet. They tended to focus on one of the single pictures. We just go to the last slide now. So 3 key messages. Storytelling and context. Think about health information as stories, and that will help give meaning to information. We know that one size doesn't fit all, so it's really important to co-design with people. And finally, in practice, you know, it's really important to think about the role of carers as mediators for health information, because at the end of the day, they're the best interpreters of communication methods. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Alison, and sorry that it had to be a race at the end. Very interesting.
I understand.
So now I'd like to pass over to Claire and Zoe. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our presentation, Bridging the Gap, where we'll be discussing our initiative, which aims to provide tailored oral hygiene sessions for young people with learning disabilities, whilst equipping trainee dentists with vital clinical and communication skills for special care dentistry.
Okay, so it's showing me as it's sharing the full screen. Is that showing properly? No. Yeah, I'm not too sure why it's click them. Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you. So my name's Claire Johnston. I'm a speech and language therapist at Heart of Birmingham Vocational College.
And my name's Zoe Abbas. I'm a clinical lecturer in restorative dentistry at the University of Birmingham. So on to our next slide now. So currently the evidence highlights that oral health outcomes are poorer for those with learning disabilities compared to those without, with conditions such as dental caries, gingivitis, and periodontal disease being more prevalent. Poor oral hygiene has been linked to some major health risks, including cardiovascular and respiratory infections, and it has a very profound impact on communication, socialization, and overall quality of life. These issues can lead to things like chronic pain and a reduced quality of life, as well as limited access to dental care services, which will then exacerbate anxiety and can then further worsen dental conditions. The issues highlighted, the issues that we have mentioned, they highlighted the need to develop an initiative to help tackle these disparities, which is where Claire and I started this project together.
So the project was rooted in addressing the systematic inequalities in oral health for young people with learning disabilities. So I had observed in previous settings where I'd worked and a previous career many years ago as a dental nurse that oral hygiene is a significant challenge for young people that I've supported in the past and currently support as part of my daily work. As part of independent living skills at the college, curriculum tutors are expected to deliver sessions about oral hygiene to support independent living skills, but they're not trained specifically in this area with those skills to teach that. And as speech and language therapists, supporting oral hygiene is part of our role. Yet again, there is limited specific training for SLTs to support our knowledge and development and understanding of oral hygiene and how to manage this. And another aspect of our role is that it's our job to help bridge the health inequality gap for those that we work alongside.
So there's limited access to appropriate dental services, and poor oral hygiene, it not only impacts physical health, but also diminishes things like self-esteem and the ability to socialise. Research highlighted a gap in dental education regarding care for individuals with special needs, and many trainee dentists report lacking the confidence and the skills to treat this population upon graduation. This then further reinforced the importance of providing practical, hands-on learning opportunities for dental students in this area.
So certain conditions such as cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, will reduce compliance with recommended oral hygiene practice due to restrictions with dexterity, and this is further compounded by if there are sensory processing challenges. Some medications that are taken by individuals with learning disabilities can also reduce salivary flow, and this increases the risk of developing dental caries. All of the issues that we discussed in the slide demonstrated the need for this collaboration and motivated us to develop this initiative.
The slides aren't moving.
Oh. Is it on the pink slide? Yeah. Okay, so the project began with an invitation to fourth year dental students at Birmingham University. I have to say and give a lot of credit to Zoe, because I rang up with a question and I was very lucky to have Zoe at the end of the phone, who I was able to share my idea with, and she was very keen to collaborate, and that makes all the difference with these sorts of projects. So Zoe asked for volunteers at the dental hospital, and 11 students responded eager to gain experience in special care dentistry. To prepare, they attended a teaching session led by myself and one of the vice principals here at the college, where we covered special education needs and learning disabilities and speech, language and communication needs. There was and best practice that we use for working with our learners here at the college. There was also signposting to the communication access training and other resources such as sensory strategies specifically designed to support dentists.
So once the dental students had had these fantastic training sessions with Claire, to prepare for the in-person sessions themselves, the dental students created resources, which included things like making videos, and they brought along toothbrushing models to help deliver the sessions. The dental students worked in pairs across the different classrooms and used visual aids, dental models, and the toothbrushes to demonstrate proper oral hygiene techniques. The learners also brought their own toothbrushes, which allowed them to practice under the direct guidance. And this slide shows some of the resources that were created by our fantastic dental students.
Okay, has that changed? Yeah, I think we've got the gremlins here today. Okay, so here on this image we have a selection of pictures with some of our learners and the trainee dentists delivering the oral hygiene sessions. So there was a range of methods and approaches that we use. So here we have students with the models and then practicing themselves on themselves. There was, because we have such a breadth of learner within the college, some sessions involved sorting and matching and sequencing activities once they've been taught different sort of the process of brushing teeth, etc.
So for the dental students, the experience was transformative. The programme enhanced their readiness to provide compassionate, patient-centred care, which is a very crucial skill, particularly in special care dentistry. As we can see, one of the students said that I feel I've gained so much knowledge on how to interact and teach young people and feel more confident in doing so. So this really demonstrates how valuable sessions such as this can be in helping to improve the confidence of our future professionals. And I think that overall it highlights that the partnership, it will highlight the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration in addressing the health disparities. By combining expertise in education, healthcare and communication, programmes such as this one can really empower vulnerable groups while shaping future professionals to deliver inclusive care. And we're really looking forward to developing this programme even further over the next few years.
So for our tutors, the feedback from them was that they felt a lot more confident in delivering oral hygiene sessions. So when the sessions ran, the trainee dentists were in there with the learning coaches and the tutors. So it was a very collaborative approach. So the trainee dentists were teaching not only the students, but the staff, and then the staff were supporting the dentists with how to adapt their communication and address any barriers that they may have met with learners. They were also able to do things like model Makaton, although the dentists were really impressive and really went out of the way to learn basic Makaton signs for dentists, toothbrushing and introducing themselves with their names, etc. So for the tutors, they were saying that they were new, sort of one tutor, they were new to the role and knew that this would be part of the curriculum they would cover, but it had given them the confidence to do so. And it helped alleviate anxieties around dental health, and they got good advice, not just about dental health, but eating and drinking that they could support learners with as well. For our learners, obviously their feedback was imperative. So with the project, letters were sent home in home languages so we could ensure that parents understood that this wasn't a dental examination. We know how tough it is to get dentists in sort of currently at the moment, and a lot of our learners don't have those opportunities. But from this project and the feedback that our learners gave, and the opportunity to feedback was delivered in lots of different ways. But some of the feedback was that they learned to brush their teeth and their gums and how to do the different surfaces. A lot of our learners also asked about how to they wanted to learn how to book appointments for a dentist, how to find a dentist, and that's helped shape the curriculum as well. So they've had that input into their future learning. And they also asked for things like flossing. How do I learn to floss? Which has helped the next group of dentists that followed to include additional things that we didn't think maybe they'd have an interest or want to learn about, but actually they did.
So we've now got some really lovely photographs of some of our dental students and the learners in the classroom themselves. So the image on the top left-hand side, it shows one of our dental students teaching a learner how to correctly angle and how to correctly use the toothbrush on a model. So making sure to brush both the teeth and along the pink gums as well. And the images on the bottom row show the dental student providing some one-to-one support for one of the learners. And the learners using their toothbrush and using what we call the modified Bass technique, brushing technique. And that was taught by the dental students in the classroom and then in this one-to-one session as well.
So in terms of the project, so we've done this for 2 years now with 2 different cohorts of students, and what really sort of demonstrated the sort of the reason to keep going with it and sort of clear rationales was that some dentists from the previous initial group that we had came to talk to the new volunteers, And she spoke to them, and she said that if they had the opportunity to do anything during their training, that coming to the college was something that they really should do, and that it was transformative to her practice, both with how she would approach adults and paediatrics, and really made her think about her communication and how she needed to adapt it. And for our learners, it's been transformative because we've had a lot of learners who were terrified of going to the dentist, and now they've, reported back to us that they're happy to go to the dentist, and they've met people who they're not afraid of. It's not such an unknown entity as to what they're going to do. Any previous negative experiences they've had have maybe potentially been mitigated now by meeting friendly dentists who are not hurting them, giving them injections, etc. But it has resulted in a pickup in wanting to go to the dentist, and learners asking to have toothbrushes in college and incorporating that into part of their morning routine or after lunch, etc. So it's been really beneficial for both parties. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, and for persisting with all that techie horror. Now I'll just pass on to Jill, and hopefully the last bit will be all smooth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully I am sharing my presentation. Hopefully my presentation will move with me, but if not, we'll cope. Thank you so much for really very interesting presentations that have focused on different aspects. And I'm going to share with you today something a little different again. So I'm Professor Jill Bradshaw. I'm a speech and language therapist. I'm also Professor of Communication Health and Social Care at the University of Birmingham. We have newly formed an Intellectual Disabilities Research Unit, which is very exciting to be a part of. And what I've been invited to talk to you about today is this project that we're doing. And so this is about improving communication with adults with learning disabilities who are in adult social care settings, so long stay settings that are not NHS settings. Okay, so we're part of a large team, and this presentation is part of an NIHR programme grant for applied research. Therefore, I am required to display the usual disclaimer. This is my views and not those of the funder. I have also shared with you our website and also our preprint. We've just submitted the work that I'm going to talk about, and you can have a look at that if you would like to. I'm happy to share that with anybody. So, our programme grant for applied research is a big programme, as you would expect, and it spans across several years. And what I wanted to do was to spend a little bit of time, first of all, just thinking about our bigger programme grant. So our goal for this is to really think about and have the opportunity in ways that only research gives you, because you have that luxury of being able to stand outside of or stand alongside of, and to really take time to explore the things that are happening in ways that it's quite difficult to do when you're part of the system. So our goal was to improve the quality of life outcomes for adults with intellectual disabilities. And to very much do that by working with people with intellectual disabilities, with paid and family carers, with provider organisations, and with other health and social care professionals. And the previous two speakers have showed examples of that kind of collaboration, co-production, ways of working together that are enormously helpful. We're particularly focused on implementation support for communication in those settings. And ultimately, we started out from a viewpoint that it's not the quality of the training that happens, and training is often the vehicle for change in terms of making a difference to communication. We think the training's not the issue, it's about the implementation of that support. And so ultimately, in our wider study, we're going to be doing something to support implementation of good communication. We're going to be collecting lots of different measures, but we're not really doing an effectiveness trial. But that's taking you to where we are now in our journey. And I want to focus and spend the time that I've got with you today thinking about where it was that we started off and how our thinking has evolved. So our initial thoughts when we were thinking about, well, why is it that you can walk into a setting that supports adults with learning disabilities, where there's probably at least an element of speech and language therapy that is being accessed, where actually lots of things about the way the person's being supported are probably quite good, but the support for communication is the bit that's often harder to find in terms of examples of really good support. So we started off thinking about, well, why is that the case? And we were thinking about the barriers and challenges at system and organisational levels as to why communication interventions are often not implemented. Because very often, as speech and language therapists, when we're asked to intervene, it's usually clear what we need to change, what we need to do, but it can be really difficult to actually intervene in ways that last, in ways that survive the churn and the changeover of staff. Why is that when other implementations are probably, other interventions are probably implemented more routinely? And so the consequences of not having good communication support are really quite wide ranging, and they include things like reduced personalisation and choice, reduced engagement in daily activities, social relationships and quality of life. And so they're things that are really important in terms of trying to manipulate and trying to make a difference. And we know that many of the challenges relate to staff conditions, lack of support and organisational environment. But actually, the removal of those barriers is necessary, but not sufficient to achieve improved communication. So additional measures were needed. And so our question really was, in the communication partnerships between people with learning disabilities and their staff, what changes need to happen in order to achieve good communication and the linked outcomes in terms of good choice, support for participation, and ultimately changes in quality of life. And so because that was our question, it seemed to us obvious that what we needed was to explore some of the realist methods of thinking about what was already known in this area. So just a very quick overview of realist methods. They are methods that are used to study complex interventions, and whereas a systematic review might be quite limited in terms of your question is, does this work or not? Realist review is messier and tries to identify what works for whom and under what circumstances. And we were really interested in that in terms of people with learning disabilities and organisations and individual houses really being very different, really being very diverse, really having lots of different characteristics. And so at the core is that you develop what are called interim programme theories that try and explain what needs to change in order to achieve certain outcomes. And they very typically include multiple data sources, they're iterative, they include stakeholder engagement, purposive searches, and often assessments that are assessments of relevance rather than a more systematic review, which is looking at assessments of quality. Okay. So apologies for cramming so much onto the slides, and I am really happy to share the slides with anybody who would like them. What we did then is we developed two processes, and I want to talk to you about the screening that we did of the existing literature first of all, and then move on to talk to you about the ways that we engaged with people with learning disabilities and family carers and health and social care professionals and sort of commissioners. So we wanted to look at the literature that we've got, and we were interested in literature if it explored and included adults who were at least 18, and where the majority of the study was about adults with learning disabilities who were living in long-term care settings. And we were really interested in those studies that were involved with and thinking about increasing people's communication skills, increasing staff capacity or capability, and in making organisations and systems more supportive of communication. And we didn't mind whether they were qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods of research. And we didn't, there could be any comparator, including pre and post. And so, as you would expect, we had a huge number of articles that were identified and went through the process of screening, looking for relevance. And we ended up with a final set of 81 articles where we thought about the extent to which the information within them was highly relevant, and ended up with a set of papers where we had 31. So 6 were highly relevant and 23 were of moderate relevance. And that doesn't add up to that number, that adds up to 29. Apologies. So just to be clear that we absolutely acknowledge that there are limitations in those studies, and the kinds of things that those of you who work particularly with adult populations and who have been able to read some of the literature or contribute to some of the literature, you'll know that there are often really quite poor and inconsistent conceptualizations of communication. There's often not great information contained within publications about what people did and why certain designs were used, and which outcomes, and that really hindered our process of trying to take all this data and distill it into a set of manageable interim programme theories. So we address this by trying to focus on patterns and trying to use data quite flexibly, and also on getting information that we were taking sense checked. Is this plausible? Does this make sense? Is this within your experience by our groups of people who were working alongside us? So apologies again for another very small slide, but I just wanted to outline the process that we took in terms of those consultations. So we had 2 sets of consultations And that's very common in a realist review, that you run those processes alongside with one another. And in our first consultation, we were really thinking about what's the scope of the review, what the programme theory entails, what does good and bad communication look like, why is it important, and the challenges of implementing. And then our second consultations were much more focused. And so one of the things that you get from a realist review are statements that are context, mechanism, outcome configurations. And so you get statements that are kind of like, if something happens, then, if this is the case, then something happens because. And so we took those in narrative form and asked people, what do you think this means for the person? Why doesn't it always happen? And how could this be achieved? And then that's all come together very beautifully in our interim programme theory. Okay, and I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail as much as the time will allow me to. So this is just all of that information that's synthesised together, and we have split it so that we are recognising the resources that are required to modify the organisational context. So that's that top bit. And once we've modified that bit, then we can go on and look at the changes in staff beliefs, awareness, attitudes, knowledge, beliefs, and skills in order to lead to improvements in communication. So let me just go on to the next slide. Again, this slide's slightly grainy. I apologise for that. So this initial part is about the resources. So what resources might be needed? What are the short-term outcomes for staff? What are the communication outcomes between staff and people with learning disabilities? And so if the organisational structure, recruitment procedures and leadership reflect that communication is a priority and a human right, that should mean that you have a staff team who understand that good communication is a priority and is their responsibility, that staff regard people with learning disabilities and their capacity to communicate positively, and that staff understand that communication is a skill worth investing their time in. And if that's something that we're able to get right, then we should get active engagement of staff in training and other opportunities to develop their communication skills. And then that takes us onto the bottom of our programme theory. And so that's thinking about the organisation, what organisations and staff might do, short-term outcomes for staff. And so we were thinking about sort of environmental modifications, need to provide the time, opportunities to practice, workforce development, information sharing, and then this set of skills that might mean staff have. Importantly, including that focus on communication, not just being about sharing of information, but also being about having fun together. And then
we're going to be finished in a minute. Sorry.
All right, thank you. If in order to be able to do that, then we know that communication outcomes between staff and people with learning disabilities might have these kind of characteristics, where people with learning disabilities initiate and respond to staff communication, people are spending more time together, and then the final outcomes are sort of longer term outcomes that we're hoping to develop. Okay. I had a video to share with you, but I'm going to stop my share now. So I hope that's been useful. you can absolutely access the paper and read more about what we're doing. Since then, we've gone on to develop a theory of change, and we're now at the very exciting stage of being about to implement our first intervention with some settings. And so hopefully, once we've done that, we'll be able to come back and tell you all of the things that we found that were helpful, and perhaps some of the things that we thought were going to be helpful that didn't quite work out that way. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about all three projects, because they seem to be developing all sorts of new, well, maybe they're not all new, it's confirming things that we have perhaps in our kind of heads, but actually solidly writing those down. So thank you very much. Despite the clunks, you did very well. Bye.